Hello, we are here to talk about the Builder Grade Concrete Metric plugin for PlanSwift. The subject of this video is how the assemblies are built so that you can go in and modify the assemblies for your own use, and you can see how everything is put together. This is the home page where you do all the takeoff. You can see the plugin is assigned, and we're looking at the footings right here for takeoff. However, today we're going to be working mostly in the Templates tab. Here is the Builder Grade Metric plugin that we're now looking at. These are all the top levels. If I open up the footing group here, you can see the individual assemblies for each of the type of footings that we would like to take off. Today we're going to work with this one assembly right here. However, the concepts of this one assembly apply to each and every assembly for every subject. The assembly is comprised of two parts. If I click the plus sign, you can see that right here at this line, this is the top level or the parent, and I will use both terms, the parent or the top level. From the concrete all the way down to the shape and grade footing, these are the items also known as the child or child properties. So we have the parent and then the line items or the children that belong to the parent. This makes up the assembly. Let's talk about the parent first. If I right click and go to properties, I come to the form for the parent. And here is where the default values are all set up. I have 5% concrete waste, but let's change that to 4. I have a footing depth of 300, but let's make that 333. I have a footing width of 900, but let's make that 999. What I have done is I have changed the default values that you will see in takeoff for this one assembly. If I click OK, they're accepted. Let's go over to the home page, and we say we'll do a little takeoff for the continuous footings formed to both sides. I click the green dot, the dialog box pops up, and you can see that here's the new value I put in, here's the new depth that I put in, and there is the changed concrete waste percent. So one of the things that you can do to modify the plugin for your use is you can right click here, go to properties, the dialog box will pop up, and in the dialog box you can change these values to the defaults that you would like to see, and what they should be set at is the most common values that you normally see. Now let's go inside and look a little bit. If I click advanced, we come into the detail of how this top level or parent is put together. So we're looking at the parent level. Here are the variables, the questions that we're asking. And by the way, you can also change the values right here if you wanted to. This is the estimating. This is how everything is costed out. Now the top level does not receive costs, but we will at all the children, so we'll talk about this in a minute. Here's the takeoff data, how things are taken off. And here is the work breakdown structure that is critical to the plugin and how it's used, and we'll talk about that more at the child property levels. Now, at the parent level, I am asking for all values in millimeter. But I don't want to work with millimeter when I'm doing the math calculations. So if I go to show and we go to hidden, you can see that a new group pops up called calculations. And here I'm making a conversion from millimeter to meter for each of these values. And you can see the units of measure right over here, and here's the math. The footing width divided by 1,000, the footing depth divided by 1,000. Now, at the child level, so we'll go down to the first child for the purchase of the concrete, and we will go into the properties. Notice that the form or the dialog box looks a little bit different. So we'll come back and talk about this in a minute. I go to advanced. Notice here I'm asking for the footing width in the meter and the depth in the meter, and here's the concrete waste, here's the concrete strength. Down below at the WBS codes, I'm looking for the location, the zone, the floor, and then WBS 1, 2, and 3. at the takeoff data group, notice that the area, linear total. So for all of these values, you are seeing this bracket, dot, dot, bracket. What this means is at this level in the child, you are to inherit these values from the line above or the parent. And you can see that right here. The footing width, the footing depth, they're brought over. The concrete strength, that's brought over. The concrete waste percent, that is brought over. So the values are established here under the variables at the parent level. At each of the children, we're inheriting the values so that we can work with them. Now there's a little bit of math going on in here. If I go back to the show and I see hidden again, here's the calculations for this one child or item. Here is the neat value for the footing, the linear total times the width times the depth. Here is the concrete add percent to bring in the waste factor. This is a line that calculates that, and it converts it to a factor. Here is the concrete calculation, the cubic footing, which is the neat calculation, times the concrete add percent or the factor. This value is brought down here to the quantity. Once it's brought into the quantity, then all of these values here do the calculations. All of this is set up by PlanSwift. I don't change any of this at all. However, here is the price, and once again you could modify this if you'd like to, and here is the markup percent. I understand that you're going to be changing the price and the markup percent to fit your needs. If we go to the form, you can see that once we do the takeoff, remember we're in the templates value. So once you do the takeoff and you're in the estimate tab, you will see your takeoff quantity right here. Here's the price, here's the markup, and here's your strength and your concrete waste. And the strength and the concrete waste you can turn on and off if you don't want to see them by this clicking that tab right there. Now down below we're looking at our breakdown structure, and you saw in other videos how we use the breakdown structures. Once again, you can turn this on or off. At the child levels, we are looking at the division, subdivision, and phase. And if you click the elevator bar here, you come into the list, and you saw earlier where that list comes from, and you can make these changes as you like. You can also change the CSI information going into advanced, coming down to the work breakdown structure, and just coming over to the right side, click, and once again you're back into the list where you can put in these values. Now, if we go down to the next line item, which is the placement labor for the concrete, things look a little bit different. Pretty much the same, but there's one thing that's different. We now have to take into account the labor. If I go to the form, notice that we now have the cost of the labor here, and there's a separate markup for the labor, and the quantity is going to reflect man hours. If I go in and look at advanced, you can see that we've inherited the values for the width and the depth, but there's a new value here, M3 or cubic meters per man hour for placement, and here is that value. And once again, you can change this as you like. If I go to the calculations again, here is the calculation for the footing one more time, and it's a neat calculation. I don't need the additional add percent because this is a placement of the concrete, not the purchase. And here is the man hours for placement, which is the neat calculation for the concrete divided by the productivity that you have. This arrives at the man hours. This value is brought down into here, and then PlanSwift takes it and does all these calculations down here. Here is where you put in the dollar value per man hour and the markup percent. I don't like changing these things here. Personally, I would rather change them in the form, which is what you can do right here. So this is a little primer on how the assemblies are put together. We've looked at this one assembly, we've looked at these two properties, but if I go into any of these properties, it's all the same information. So if I go to the forms and right click, go to Properties. Here's our information. I go to the form itself. The information is slightly different, but because it is the form, it's not the placement or the purchase of the concrete. I go to the Advanced tab. Once again, here's my variables. I go down below. Here are the WBS values that we have, the work breakdown structure values. There is the hidden calculations again, and in this case it is simply the square meter of the footing form. You can see that I calculate it up here, and then I bring it down to where it is put into the calculations for the cost. That is how these assemblies are put together. Once again, there's over 200 assemblies in this plugin. Some of these assemblies can get to be pretty long. Here's a lengthy one right here with a number of different line items into it. But everything works the same as I showed you for this one right here. It's been about 12 minutes. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that you like the plugin. If you have any questions, please shoot us an email or call, and we will answer your questions. Thank you very much.